Good afternoon. So David and I are going to talk about skills, which may be a sort of slight change of direction from where you've been for a lot of the day. But I'm going to pick up on sort of Andrew's final thoughts on the last presentation, which is, AI is coming, it will be powerful, and we have to get ready. And we're going to think we think about getting ready in terms of, okay, well, what skills are going to be required to get us ready? And our presentation is in two parts. I'm going to paint you quite a dark picture, and David's going to give you some light. And so that's the nature of our conversation. So where are we? So we are rushing headlong towards new iterations, new models. There is an arms race going on. And it is going so quickly that we're struggling to kind of think through the implications of what we've got, let alone kind of what's coming. So the destination really isn't clear for us. And what we can say is that this evolution isn't going to be gradual and linear. It's going to be discontinuous. It's going to come in big lumps of change. And we think that if you look sort of post-war, a lot of the technological change, computerization, robotics, it really affected what we would call blue-collar workers. But we think AI is really going to affect knowledge workers, and it's going to affect knowledge workers in a really profound way. So I really wanted to start off with a quick show of hands. So I'm really interested in how many people in this room are uncomfortable about this future shaped by artificial intelligence. Does it make anyone here feel uncomfortable? Yeah, about a third of the room. The reason we feel uncomfortable is because of the volatility, the uncertainty, the complexity, and the ambiguity. But what I would say is that maybe our one advantage here is that artificial intelligence has kind of hit the lexicon so quickly and so profoundly. We, unlike the kind of the frog in boiling water, we actually feel this. And so we have a chance, and it might be a small chance, but we have a chance to react to that and think through what the implications are before it just washes over us. There is an anthropologist, historian, philosopher called Ian Morris, and he wrote a book, Why the West Rules for Now. And within that, he talked about human progress being almost invisible until it isn't. And he encapsulates this with one of my favorite graphs. And I don't really expect you to kind of see the numbers. I'll describe the chart for you. So on this vertical, well, on the horizontal we have time, on this vertical we have population, on that vertical we have a human social development index that he created. And that is talking about energy capture, which is per person calories, the level of organization, our war-making capacity, and the diffusion of tools for processing and sharing of information. And why I find this slide really interesting is you have this really clear inflection point that Morris argues that's when the human condition changed. And he can tie that back to Watt's steam engine being introduced in 1775. And what David and I argue is that actually November the, whatever it was, 30th, 2022, is a similar inflection point. And generative AI models were around obviously before that, but this is when it kind of hit the zeitgeist. This is when it hit our consciousness, and it became widespread almost overnight. And we think we're at another one of these inflection points. Now, there is a school of thought that says AI won't replace people. People who use AI will replace people who don't. And we argue this is just optimism bias. It provides hope, but it deflects away from the scale of the threats we actually face from AI. About 80 years ago, Keynes introduced this idea of technological unemployment. He was just reflecting some arguments of Daniel Ricciardo some 120 years earlier, talking about the first industrial revolution. And Keynes's technological unemployment is due to the discovery of the means of economizing on the use of labor, outrunning the pace at which we can find new uses for it. And what's interesting about the hopeful view of AI is that it assumes it remains a technology that still needs significant human input. I've heard it described in the last few weeks as a co-pilot, which is the phrase that the government likes to use about the impact of AI. It is a co-pilot for us. In reality, we don't think it is. And this is the view of OpenAI, which is your job will be lost to someone who knows how to use AI, but that's just an interregnum until you lose your job to AI. And so, can we think of some examples of that? Well, yes, there's recently a guy called Chris Carron, who is CEO of a company called Turnitin, who make plagiarism monitoring software for academia. And they employ several hundred software engineers. And he said in a public forum that in 18 months' time, they will only need 20% of the programmers that they have today. And those programmers that they will have in the future do not need to have a college education. They can be hired straight out of high school. And AI is going to level up or level down, depending on how you look at it. There's some interesting work by the Stern and the Olin business schools in the US. And they looked at a lot of these freelance platforms. And they were particularly looking at copywriters and graphic designers on these job platforms. And what they found is that in the last 12 months, the number of jobs and the quality of jobs and the pay for jobs was in a steep decline. So this is because of the introduction of AI and the ability of AI to do those jobs. All of a sudden, the availability and the pay related to that of freelance jobs has absolutely gone through the floor. And OpenAI, interestingly, have also done some research, and they were looking at the risk profile of different jobs in terms of the risk of losing those jobs to AI. And they actually found that someone on $100,000 is 3 times as exposed as someone on $30,000. So again, and we've seen this in lots of academic literature, what we're seeing from AI is a leveling down. So we need fewer people, and we need fewer skilled people, fewer experienced people. I mean, this is a truism from Eric Brynjolfsson, who is senior fellow at the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered AI, and he wrote a book called The Second Machine Age. And he says that there's no economic law that says when technology advances, everyone necessarily benefits. Some people, even a majority of people, could be made worse off. So when we think about this coming revolution, we put it into the historical context of, say, the first industrial revolution, where hand loom weavers were replaced by the technology in the mills. What we're seeing now, the 21st century equivalent of that, is paralegals, copywriters, maybe accountants, solicitors, market researchers, knowledge workers generally are going to feel the brunt of this. Why are they going to feel the brunt of it? They're going to feel the brunt of it because what AI is doing is technological advances kind of that we've seen over time have really enabled us. They've allowed us to do more, do it better, do it faster. And what we think we're seeing with artificial intelligence is actually us moving from technology as an enabler to technology as a substitute for human endeavor. I'm I'm going to pass over to David in a second, but I just want to see if I could get another show of hands. I'm interested, and we've done this in a number of kind of sessions, and it's always interesting to see kind of where the audience comes to it. But if you think about the people in this room, if this gathering was taking place in 10 years' time, what percentage of the people in this room do you think will have been replaced by AI? Not enabled, not using it as a co-pilot, they've been replaced by AI. Does anyone think it will be less than 10%? Okay, half a dozen. 10 to 50%. Oh, bulk of the room. Anyone think it's going to be more than 50%? One. I did this a few weeks ago, and I had one person in that last category. I think the danger is that we end up here. If you look at Chris Karen talking about his business, the Turnitin business, I only need 20% of what I've got today. The danger is that that's where we end up very, very quickly. David. That was the dark. Now David will give you some lights.
Don't panic. I'm going to tell you 7 things that are going to save the world, so you don't have to worry. So what I want to do is sort of identify what I think are 7 skills that if we dial those up, we're going to be able to successfully work alongside AI. And we can let the AI do all the kind of heavy lifting, and we can actually focus on sort of creativity and critical thinking and areas where we're particularly strong. So I'm going to go through these 7 power skills one by one. There they are. I think I've got maybe a couple of minutes on each one, so I've got to go reasonably quickly. So the first idea here is of us being sense makers, and what I mean by that is that we are kind of like the wide-angle lens of the organisation. And I picked that quote up from an episode of The West Wing years ago, where a guy goes in and says, "Hey, I've just been made the presidential advisor. What's that?" And they said, "Look, you're the guy that's got to tell the president what's happening in Israel, connects up with our relations with China, how that affects, selling farm machinery in the Midwest, blah, 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 through to how do we win the Florida and, Georgia primaries. Pause. You are the president's wide-angle lens." And I've always sort of liked that idea, which leads to this quote here, if you look at it from Isaiah Berlin, this ability of people that are in demand in organisations to have that acute sense of what fits with what springs from what, and what leads to what. So it's a very powerful skill to have. And I know the earlier speaker was talking about having that context of the survey. But in my career in research, people that have had that skill have always been in demand. And if you're trying to pin it down to a methodology, I wrote a book called The Art and Science of Interpreting Market Research Evidence in 2004. And in it, I was sort of trying to anticipate where we might head with the need for analysing lots of data in a holistic way. And I had this model, which was basically a fuzzy logic model, which is about the idea of data having weight, power, and direction, which looks at how you're integrating qual and quant data, how you're looking at it through classic methodological criteria in relation to more experience that we have, together with stuff about the direction of evidence. So you put all that together, you've got a fuzzy logic model, and that's the kind of framework that underpins this idea of the sense maker. So if we've got those skills, I think that that's going to help us. The second is this idea of the critical thinker. Now, the way I'm reading AI is it's going to be all over deductive reasoning, it's going to be all over inductive reasoning, and the piece that we've got to work with is abductive reasoning, which means where there's always an element of uncertainty and imperfection in the data that we need to compensate for, and that's where our particular skill creeps in. So that takes us back to Alan Turing and the idea of being a brilliant mathematician, but he was also working in cracking the Enigma code with intuition. He was making these assumptions, And when I've been writing about this stuff lately, I sort of like working with the idea of informed intuition. And so there's something there about developing those abductive reasoning skills and making that something to focus on. The next, the audacious creator. There was something I read about just soon after ChatGPT came out saying, average creativity is going to come for free. So you've really got to up your game and be audacious in terms of your kind of creativity. And I think, the key is how we go beyond simply, creative prompt engineering around generating creativity. And there I think we can hang on to an idea that creativity is a very disciplined business. That a lot of, like Barnes Wallace, when he said, "I've never invented anything in my life. I just respond to problems." And there's a great quote from Johnny Mercer, the songwriter. They said, "Mr. Mercer, what comes first, the words or the music?" He said, "The phone call." And that is really, I think, where we're sort of coming from, that we're good at problem-generated creativity. So we hang on to that piece of what we're doing. So moving on to the next one, the forward thinker. Now, Adam and I, when we're doing work in scenario planning, we work with the kind of 3 hours in time model, which is looking at power trends, and AI is all over that, giving us that basic sort of trend data. Then there's the idea of looking at the accelerating presence, and again, AI is going to help us with that. But the difficult bit there is the idea of looking at stuff that's coming at us, the uncertainties, and making sense of that. Now here, a good book to read is Thomas Stoddard. He's got a book called The Invention of Tomorrow, and it's quite a powerful read because he's saying that we as human beings have the ability for kind of like time travel. We're kind of time machines. We can go back in time and recall, visceral. It's funny today, 60 years the day Kennedy was shot. I am old enough to remember that day. It's quite a visceral memory that I can actually carry forward, and so it helps us understand what we want going into the future. So, funny enough as well, but being a bit topical, 30 years ago I was in the Gaza Strip, long story. So when I'm watching the news now, those experiences from there are helping me understand what it's like to be there now, and that gives us something that maybe AI can't capture and easily replicate. So we've got that particular ability. Now, in terms of communication, we know that's crucial, and everyone's got the storytelling email now, but I think we still got to up our game, because you can still get a pretty good story out of AI. But this quote here about transmitting, what we should be doing, transmitting powerful critical powerful transformational cycle, comes from William James. 100 years ago, he was Henry James' brother, and he was saying we need to be in that business of really upping the ante in terms of how we communicate. So I know it's a big ask, but you've got to be thinking about Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream speech, that kind of architecture, if you want to compete in the world of storytelling. So we've really got to up our game and actually get to that kind of next level. And then there's the idea of galvanizing leader. So I think there's kind of 3 elements there that it's going to be hard for kind of AI to kind of replicate. One is this idea, Seth Godin talks about being a linchpin, and that is someone who can walk into chaos, and create order. I call it energy radiator. So in other words, people I've always employed, you check them out on 2 dimensions. Are you a problem simplifier or a problem confuser? Are you an energy radiator or an energy confuser? Never ever employ anyone that's an energy drain and problem confuser. Pay whatever they need to pay, more than the data engineers, in order to get a problem simplifier who's an energy radiator. That's a riff around the Godin linchpin thing. But there's a new dimension now creeping in, the idea of like compassionate leadership. This is a thing now, this is kind of reality. There's a lot of kind of emotional intelligence that goes into that. And it's not just empathy, it's not another name for empathy. It's about taking action in relation to something you kind of believe in. And that becomes an important part of that leadership role. And the final bit here is our kind of need for celebrity, isn't it? That we could get AI guest to be the newscaster, but we really want it coming through a personality. That somehow we relate to that, isn't it? you know, you've heard the expression, ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. It's something about us thinking, you know, I could have been George Bell, I could have been actually Tony Locke or Jim Lake and our heroes, but I wasn't quite good enough. I could only play for Epping Seconds, but I wasn't that far away. So there's that element there where we like kind of celebrity. So I think, you know, they're my quick whistle-stop tour of, you know, 6 things that we hang on to, and that's all pulled together with the ability to then work that AI interface. And for me, the book I'm studying most at the moment is Kahneman, not Think Fast, Think Slow, but his book called Noise, where he's got some clear guidelines in there about how you do a kind of noise audit. He's quite clear about where human beings are just, you know, not as good as AI in delivering decisions, and he's got concrete examples. So he's working out a kind of process whereby we step in. So you've got the aviation industry is a good exemplar, isn't it, of where you've got literally that idea of the pilot and the automation, and where the pilot must never make their own decisions. They have to obey the command of the technology, and situations where Sullenberg can land in the River Hudson and it's all fine, and that was the right decision. So this idea brings the 7 things together. And so just to sort of draw this to a close, it's a bit worrying. You think, how am I, if I've just come into the industry, how am I ever going to acquire all these 7 things? So it's not that we want kind of superheroes. It is the idea of the T-shaped model where everyone knows a little bit about the 7 across the top, but you've got your specialism. But on a slightly downer note, coming back to some of the concerns Adam's got, is that this would work maybe for whatever percentage of people that are in work, but there's still that big issue of how all the dynamics of who gets these skills works. There's going to be some surprises. There's going to be someone who's got an MBA from Harvard that thinks it's kind of, they got the dream ticket for the future, that is not going to actually succeed because AI is taking a lot of that role. And there's going to be other people that are actually leapfrog above them because they've got some of these skills coming from a different kind of background. So it's going to get very interesting about how that, how we structure the society to deal with all these things. Am I running over time? You give me the look, yeah. Okay, right, so... Well, I'll stop there. As I say, there's a bunch of issues about how you deliver that, organisation and whatever. But I'll just stop there.
Thank you for listening to us today.
Thanks for your attention.
For more information, please look at our Substack, polymathmind.substack.com. Thank you.
Thank you, David and Adam. Questions? Comments?
Okay, yeah, me. Just a very quick observation. There was a psychologist, I can't for the life of me remember his name, who studied prediction. And he did a meta-analysis over 20 or 30 years of every expert he could find, every person he could find to predict political and social situations. And almost exclusively, everybody was wrong. So the guy who thinks he needs 20 people rather than the ones he's got at the moment, 20 devs he's got at the moment, is probably almost certainly wrong with that prediction. So maybe it's not as bad as we think. So we're just terrible at predicting.
Yeah. I'm thinking if half the people in this room lose their jobs through AI, what are they going to then do? Yeah. They're going to maybe do something new and fresh. I don't know that the maths has been worked out on. We can't imagine what they're going to do yet, and so we can't quantify it. But it's got to be. You can't just assume that you can sit around and on their arse and do nothing.
Well, it's a bit more complicated. There's already, it's getting gloomy now, isn't it? But there's already stuff out there about, I did a project, believe it or not, with, you'll remember Paddy Ashdown, who the Lib Dems were interested in the notion of citizens' income. And we were doing that 25 years ago, thinking the idea there's got to be some, and there are experiments around the world at how that works. But even if you've managed to organise the kind of tax structure and the benefit system to provide a citizen's income, there's still the issue, to your point, that people need structure, isn't it? It's not just giving them, £1,600 a month, whatever it is. It's actually so these are big issues. I haven't got answered these things. I don't want to be the harbinger of gloom. I'm just saying that there are serious issues to me heading down the line about the structure of work. I mean, so we need, on some of these skills here, we need a radical change to like the university curriculum. Soon that comes up the idea of changing A-levels in 6 years' time. The kids are going to do A-level maths. I mean, come on, it's pathetic, that you really need, radical reform of curriculum and serious thinking about some of the issues I'm talking about. And it's outside my wage band to actually deal with that, but I'm just interested in the skills, what can be done to give people these skills, and then there's the bigger macro picture around that, of which, I wish I had answers to, but I don't.
I'd also say we're not trying to predict
Andy.
the future, right? So as scenario planners, what we're interested in are plausible possible futures as a catalyst for debate and discussion about kind of what comes next. So what this is part of a process of thinking through what these futures might look like. If a CEO is saying that actually, I think having looked at my business, I only need 20% of the staff that I have today, okay, maybe you do, maybe you don't, maybe it's 40%, which should still be a significant reduction. Maybe it's just 50%, but that's just 50%. So it's really about thinking through what signs do we see out in the world today, what cues can we take, and then how can we use those to think through what the future might look like. And if the future is going to look like that, how do we need to respond to that in a timely way? And that is part of the art of scenario planning, which is at the basis of what we're doing.
Got a question here. Thank you. So what is the most plausible and desirable future that you can see for our industry?
I think, if I look at the market research industry more broadly, I think there are all sorts of, forget AI, there's all sorts of trends and factors coming through, whether it's just the amount of data, whether it's the emergence of DIY platforms, the need for decisions to be taken in a faster manner. I've heard it described as market research changing from an industry to a skill set, which is then embedded in sort of non-traditional market researchers. All of that's going on, and then you put AI into the mix. I do think that we will see an industry with a lot fewer people, but I do think what we're trying to foster is the people who are in the industry have a much broader and more connected skill set to actually allow them to do more interesting stuff, to add more utility to the decision-making process, because a lot of the base kind of analytics and decision-making will be taken away from us. So we need to kind of think about kind of what goes over and above that. And if we want to stay in the industry, we're going to have to think about how we differentiate ourselves against what the technology is going to do.
Okay, last one.
Thanks. Keynes also predicted, way back when, that we'd be working 8 hours a week by now, and we're clearly not. I don't know if you've read David Graeber's Bullshit Jobs. Do you think there's anything to that hypothesis that, professional managerial work expands to support the stability of the managerial class?
Would you like to comment on that? Well, you're saying that we're all going to have jobs like managing AI systems and whatever.
David Graeber saying it.
Yeah. No, let's say on a positive note. I've always thought, I've been in market research for years now, is that people that have the ability to crystallise problems, and try to apply some of these sort of thinking skills, we're always going to be in work. I always say that if you're going to go off and be a management consultant, work out anything in the kind of general area of business and commerce, and I was a great believer that we were the industry had those thinking skills. So in a way, nothing's changed. It's like that TSL's quote, you know, we examine it and we come back to be in the same place, but understand it for the first time. So I'm understanding, yes, it's those skills that were all there, you know, when I was a boy researcher, but they've just got to be dialed up a bit more. And if we do that, now that's all we can do, isn't it? That we become better and better in each of these sort of 7 areas, and that's important. You know, then you can build an industry around that, around these thinking skills, and the wider issues. You know, I can't really get my head around about how that all works in terms of the overall workforce.
The Elon Musk point of view was that we're only going to work for entertainment. So you know, you're going to have a job if you want a job, because it's going to entertain you. That just blows your mind when you start thinking about that. So it's not that. Whatever we end up is, it's not going to be that. Does it expand to fill the time? Maybe. I mean, but I think what you're seeing is the cost in. So you'll see more and more organisations, whether it's law practices or whoever, driving cost out of the system, driving labour out of the system because it's a cost in any way they can, and yeah, I think you'll see that happening again and again and again in more and more industries.
No, I guess the question is if more white collar industries emerge to fill that void.
Yes, maybe, but I think the danger is that AI is going to have such a profound effect. Does enough of that get created to fill to replace you know, the enormous kind of reach of AI into kind of everyday white collar work? We don't know the answer.
We have to end there. But thank you, David, and thank you, Adam.